I pulled into the driveway earlier than usual that evening, the sky still holding onto the last streaks of daylight. It had been one of those strange days at work where every meeting seemed to cancel itself and every task wrapped up faster than expected. I thought maybe I'd use the extra time to surprise Claire. Maybe take her out for dinner, or just sit on the back deck together with a drink like we used to. That's when I noticed it. An unfamiliar sedan was parked a few houses down from ours. Not right in front, but close enough to be within sight from our porch. It wasn't one of the neighbors' cars. I know them all by heart after living here for years. The paint was a muted silver, nothing flashy, but the passenger window caught the fading light just right, revealing something inside. A small, tan leather handbag rested on the seat, angled so the clasp caught the glow of the street lamp. It wasn't just similar to Claire's. It was the same model, the same shade, even the same little scratch near the handle from when she'd caught it on the corner of our kitchen counter last spring. I knew that bag. She carried it everywhere, grocery runs, coffee dates, even just quick errands. My first thought was practical. Maybe she'd loaned it to a friend, or maybe one of her coworkers with the same taste in accessories had dropped by. But something in me, a low hum, barely there, was already uneasy. As I pulled into the driveway, I glanced toward our living room windows. Normally by this time of day, the curtains would be drawn halfway closed, letting in just enough evening light while still giving us privacy. Tonight, they were pulled tightly shut, the fabric pressed flat as if someone had made a deliberate choice to block out the world. I stepped out of the car and stood there for a moment, listening. It was quiet, quieter than it should have been. No faint hum of the TV, no music from Claire's favorite playlist, no clink of dishes from the kitchen. Just the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere down the block. When I unlocked the front door, the first thing that hit me wasn't what I saw, it was what I smelled. A faint trace of cologne drifted through the entryway. Not my cologne. Something sharper, muskier. The kind of scent you'd expect from a department store's executive line. I paused, one hand still on the doorknob, my heart ticking a little faster. I stepped inside, my shoes making the softest thud on the hardwood floor. The house felt arranged, still quiet, almost staged. My eyes darted toward the living room. The couch cushions were slightly indented, as if someone had been sitting there not long ago, and the coffee table had two coasters out side by side. Both were dry. From the kitchen came the faintest clink, like glass against granite. I followed the sound. There, on the counter, sat two wine glasses. One near the edge, the other set closer to the sink, each with a small pool of deep red left at the bottom. Between them lay the cork from the bottle, still damp, and the opener with its spiral flecked in the same red. A thin smear of wine trailed along the counter toward the cutting board, where a few crumbs of cheese still clung to the surface. Claire appeared from the hallway before I could take in more. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, a style she usually reserved for late at night or early mornings, but her makeup was still fresh. Her face lit up the moment she saw me, though there was something about her expression. It was too quick, too perfect, like an actor hitting their mark. "You're home early," she said, her voice carrying a brightness that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah," I replied, setting my work bag down slowly near the door. "Got out ahead of schedule." Her hands were clasped loosely in front of her as she stepped further into the kitchen, the space between us feeling suddenly wider than it should. Without missing a beat, she launched into a rapid-fire update about a leaky faucet in the guest bathroom and how we might need to replace the washer in the handle. She moved with purpose, picking up the cork and dropping it into the trash, running the glasses under a quick rinse, sliding the cheese crumbs into her palm to toss them out. She didn't look at me directly, her eyes instead skimming past mine toward some invisible point over my shoulder. Every part of her tone said, "Don't ask questions." "I was just about to start dinner," she added, opening the fridge and bending slightly to retrieve something from the lower shelf. I noticed she moved the wine bottle deeper into the fridge, tucking it behind a carton of orange juice as though it had no particular significance. "Looks like you already had a drink," I said, keeping my voice even. She glanced at the counter, then back at me, her smile unwavering. "Oh yeah, I poured one for myself while I was waiting for you, but I didn't want to drink alone." So I left it. Guess I should have saved it for you. I nodded, pretending to accept the explanation, though my eyes lingered on the wine opener still damp on the counter. I could feel the faint buzz of questions gathering at the edges of my mind, pressing for attention, but I let them drift for now. Instead, I leaned against the doorway and watched her pull vegetables from the crisper, her movements efficient, almost rehearsed. She talked about grocery prices, about a package that got delivered to the wrong address, about how the neighbor's dog had gotten loose again. None of it mattered. None of it explained the car parked down the street, or the men's cologne, or the way the air in the house felt heavier than it had that morning. I didn't press. Not right then. Some part of me wanted to see where she'd take this, what story she was building. But as I nodded along, feigning interest in the minor domestic updates, I knew I was cataloging every detail. And in that moment, standing there with the smell of unfamiliar cologne still faint in the air, I realized that sometimes the most dangerous truths don't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. They creep in quietly, disguised as ordinary evenings. That night, I lay in bed staring at the dark ceiling, the slow rotation of the ceiling fan casting faint, shifting shadows across the room. Claire was asleep beside me, or at least she was pretending to be. Her breathing was steady, a little too steady, like she was performing for an audience she thought couldn't tell the difference. I kept my own breaths even, not wanting to give away the fact that my mind was churning, that sleep felt as far away as morning. My eyes followed the faint line of moonlight sliding across the wall, but my thoughts were already somewhere else. Months back, sifting through moments that, at the time, I'd chosen to ignore. It was like flipping through a photo album of warning signs. The sudden evening meetings that always popped up last minute. Her text messages that came with a sharp laugh but no explanation. The way she started disabling location tracking on her phone after years of never bothering with it. I remembered the first time I noticed that, the little grayed-out icon in our shared app, and how she'd brushed it off with a quick, "It must have glitched. I'll fix it later." She never did. Dinner had become a quiet affair lately. We'd sit across from each other with plates between us, exchanging only the bare minimum. "Pass the salt? Did you pay the water bill? How was work?" The easy, rambling conversations we used to have had been replaced with this tense, measured silence, where every word felt like it had to be weighed before being spoken. Then there were the trips downtown, shopping with a friend or meeting someone for coffee. Always vague, always just out of sync with what I knew of her schedule. She'd return with the kind of restless energy that didn't match an afternoon of browsing boutiques. One afternoon a few months ago, while she was in the shower, I'd reached into her bag to grab her car keys. That's when I found the receipts, 2 of them, from restaurants I'd never been to with her. Upscale places. One was a dim-lit Italian spot that required reservations weeks in advance. The other, a wine bar downtown that catered to the after-work crowd in tailored suits. Both receipts were for 2 people. She'd tucked them deep into an inner pocket, as if they were meant to be forgotten. When I asked casually about her weekend plans a few days later, she became irritable, shutting down the conversation entirely. The more I replayed these incidents in my head, the more they began to form a shape, like a puzzle I hadn't wanted to admit I'd been assembling all along. That shape wasn't pretty. I shifted onto my side, facing away from her, the sheet twisting around my legs. My chest ached in that dull, persistent way that has nothing to do with the body and everything to do with the mind. I told myself for months that there were reasonable explanations, that suspicion was just the byproduct of stress and work and too much time to think. But tonight felt different. The handbag in the stranger's car, the scent of cologne in my own home, the wine glasses still warm from being held. They were too specific, too tangible to ignore. I don't know how long I lay there, staring into the dark, but at some point my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It wasn't a message for me. It was hers, face down as always, but the screen had lit just enough for me to see a name flash before it disappeared. Not saved as a contact, just a number. By the time morning came, I was hollow-eyed and restless. I moved through the day on autopilot, my body performing the motions of getting dressed, making coffee, nodding through conversations at work, while my mind stayed locked on the night before. Then, that afternoon, My phone lit up with a message from Aaron, a friend of mine who worked in private security. We'd known each other for years. He was the kind of guy who could get his hands on information without making it obvious he'd been there at all. "Thought you should see this," the message read. Attached was a short, grainy video clip, surveillance footage from outside a bar downtown. My stomach tightened before I even hit play. There she was, Claire, wearing the same camel-colored coat she'd put on that very morning when she left for errands. The timestamp in the corner showed it had been filmed only a few hours earlier. She was sitting in the driver's seat of a car I didn't recognize, the window rolled halfway down. Beside her, in the passenger seat, sat a man. His face was turned toward her, smiling. Her hand rested on his shoulder like it had been there a while. Then she leaned in and kissed him. Not a polite peck. A slow, deliberate kiss. My thumb hovered over the pause button, but I didn't need to see more. I'd seen enough. It's strange. When you imagine discovering something like this, you picture rage, shouting, maybe even breaking something in the heat of the moment. But when the truth finally crystallizes, it's not fire you feel. It's ice. Everything goes cold. My mind stopped racing. My heart stopped pounding. There was just a stillness, as if some part of me had already known all along. Every excuse she'd ever given, every deflection, every carefully chosen word, it all fell into place. There was no more room for denial. When I got home that evening, I didn't wait for her to arrive. I went to the bedroom, pulled a travel bag from the closet, and began to pack her things. Shirts, sweaters, jeans, folded neatly. Toiletries gathered in a pouch. The drawer where she kept her jewelry clicked shut as I took the box and nestled it among the clothes. I didn't throw anything, didn't break anything. I wanted no trace of anger in what I was doing. Only precision. I carried the bag downstairs and placed it by the front door. Then, after a moment's thought, I opened the door and set it outside on the porch. The night air spilled in, cool and clean. For the first time in months, it felt like I could breathe without forcing it. By the time her car pulled into the driveway, I was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter. She walked in, her eyes darting briefly to the bag outside before looking back at me. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to keep her voice even. "I think you know," I said. The conversation that followed was brief, clipped, and offered nothing I hadn't already learned. She didn't deny it, not outright. She just circled the same phrases. "It's not what you think. I can explain. It was a mistake." None of it mattered anymore. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just told her to take the bag and go. When the door shut behind her, I stood in the quiet for a long time, listening to the emptiness of the house. It was remarkable how silence could feel so different. Oppressive one moment, liberating the next. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and let the cool air from the open window drift across my face. I wasn't looking for answers anymore. Her actions had already given me all I needed. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I didn't scroll endlessly or second-guess myself. I already knew who to contact. The name had been tucked in the back of my mind for months, mentioned by a coworker who'd gone through his own ugly divorce. "If you ever need someone who won't waste your time," he'd said, "call Pierce." Pierce's office was on the top floor of a modest brick building downtown. No polished high-rise, no glass walls. Just a quiet space that felt more deliberate than flashy. He greeted me with a firm handshake, the kind that told you he'd done this too many times to be surprised by anything you were about to say. I handed him my phone and let him watch the video Aaron had sent. He didn't flinch, didn't pause. Just let it play to the end before sliding it back across the desk. "You've got more than enough here," he said, his tone even. "No kids, no shared business, no complicated joint assets. It'll move quickly. The evidence makes it clean." Clean. The word felt strange in my mouth. Nothing about this felt clean, but I understood what he meant. We went through the paperwork. Dates, signatures, a list of possessions that would stay with me. I initialed where he pointed, the pen scratching over the pages with mechanical precision. This wasn't just a legal process. It was the formal closing of something I'd been trying to keep alive long after it had stopped breathing. When I left his office, the weight in my chest was the same, but it sat differently. Less like a jagged rock. More like something I could carry without it cutting me every time I moved. That evening, I half expected Claire to show up at the door, maybe to collect the rest of her things or to try another round of explanations. Instead, I got a text. "Can we please talk?" I set the phone down without replying. A few minutes later, "I know you're angry, but you don't understand the whole story." And then, "We can fix this if you just let me explain." I didn't respond to any of them. It wasn't silence out of spite. It was silence because I didn't see what words could possibly bridge the gap she'd created. Over the next week, the messages kept coming. Short ones, long ones, some full of nostalgia. "Remember our trip to Charleston? We were so happy." Others dipped into guilt or desperation. "I can't believe you're just throwing this away. Please don't do this to us." I read them all, but they slid off me like water on glass. I'd learned something in the last few days. Engaging with her words gave them power, and I wasn't interested in giving her any more of that. Still, I documented each one. Screensh *TS, timestamps, saved in a folder labeled C. Not because I planned to use them, but because I wanted to remind myself later, on the days when I might feel a pull toward forgiveness, just how easily she turned to someone else and how quickly she tried to rewrite the story. Meanwhile, the paperwork moved forward. Pierce was efficient, almost unnervingly so. Every few days, I'd get a call or an email. "We've filed this." Or, "Here's the court date." The absence of shared children or business ventures meant there were no long negotiations, no drawn-out debates over custody or control. One night, as I was going through the kitchen drawers looking for a screwdriver, I found one of her old to-do lists shoved behind a stack of takeout menus. Her neat handwriting marched down the page in bullet points. Pick up dry cleaning. Book salon appointment. Call mom. Text M. Text M. I stared at it for a long time, wondering if M was the man from the video. I didn't know, and I didn't need to. The truth was already complete in my head, and adding details wouldn't make it better. It would just make it messier. By the second week, the house began to feel different. Not warmer exactly, but quieter in a way that wasn't oppressive. I cooked simple dinners for myself, left dishes in the sink if I felt like it, rearranged the living room furniture without consulting anyone. Small freedoms, barely noticeable on their own, but together they formed something like relief. One evening, my phone buzzed again. Not with a text this time, but with a voicemail. I almost deleted it without listening, but curiosity got the better of me. Her voice filled the room, smaller than I remembered it being. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," she said, her breath hitching. "I made a mistake, and I hate myself for it. I've been replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out where I went wrong. I miss you. I miss us. Please, can we just talk? Just once?" I played it twice, not because I was considering calling her, but because I wanted to hear the pauses, the way her voice wavered in certain places. I wondered if she was crying because she'd lost me, or because she'd been caught. A few days later, Pierce called. "We've got the hearing date," he said. "Given the circumstances, I don't expect any delays. If she doesn't contest, it'll be final before the end of the month." Final. The word landed differently than clean. It didn't sting. It just settled, like a fact I'd known all along but hadn't said out loud. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and stared at the spot where her bag had sat the night she left. It struck me how much of life can shift in such a short span. A month ago, that spot had been nothing, just a stretch of hardwood by the door. Then it became the marker of an ending. Now it was just empty space again, waiting for something new to fill it. The next morning, she sent another text. "I'm going to the hearing. I need to see you." I didn't answer. The morning of the hearing was unremarkable in every way except for what it meant. I woke up before my alarm, not from nerves but from habit. The air was cool, the kind that makes you want to stay under the covers a little longer, but I couldn't. Today was about finishing something that had already ended. I dressed plainly. Dark slacks, a pressed shirt, nothing that could be mistaken for an attempt to make an impression. The courthouse downtown wasn't far, and traffic was light. I parked in a public lot and walked the last block, the rhythm of my footsteps steady on the concrete. Pierce was waiting for me outside the courtroom, leaning casually against the wall with a folder in his hand. "She's here," he said quietly. I followed his gaze and saw her near the end of the hall. Claire. She looked smaller somehow, wrapped in a pale coat, her hair loose around her shoulders. She was talking to someone I didn't recognize, her lawyer, I guessed. For a moment, her eyes flicked toward me, and I could see it. The tightness around her mouth, the faint crease between her brows. She wanted to say something. We didn't speak before the hearing. Inside, it was all business. The judge reviewed the file, asked a few questions for the record, and confirmed that neither party contested the terms. Claire's voice was steady when she answered, but her hands twisted together in her lap. Mine stayed still on the table. The whole thing took less than 20 minutes. Pierce leaned toward me afterward and said, "That's it. You're free to go." Free. The word didn't spark joy, but it did bring a quiet sense of release, like unclenching a fist I'd forgotten I was holding. Outside the courtroom, Claire approached. "Can we talk?" she asked. I shook my head. "It's done, Claire." "Please," she said, stepping closer. "Just 5 minutes. I need you to understand." "What I understand," I said, keeping my voice even, "is that we stood in front of a judge today because of choices you made. Choices you kept making even after I gave you the chance to stop. I went back to work, answered emails, even sat through a meeting without hearing half of what was said. It was as though my body was moving through the motions of a normal day while my mind kept circling one fact. It's over. That night, I came home to an empty house. Not just physically empty, emotionally empty in a way that was both unsettling and oddly peaceful. No second car in the driveway, no shoes by the door, no faint hum of someone moving through the rooms. I cooked a simple dinner and ate it at the kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. The quiet was thick, but not hostile. It was mine. Over the next few days, she tried again, calls, texts, even showing up once. I didn't answer the first 2. On the 3rd day, she knocked on the door, and I opened it just enough to stand in the frame. "Why won't you talk to me?" she asked, her voice already fraying. "Because there's nothing left to talk about," I said. "You can't just erase everything we had," she said. "I'm not erasing it," I replied. "I'm accepting that it's gone." Her eyes shone, but whether it was grief or frustration, I couldn't tell. She stepped back, nodding slightly, and left without another word. After that, the silence returned. I began to notice changes in myself, small at first. I slept through the night without waking to check the time. I didn't glance automatically at my phone for messages that weren't coming. I started making plans without the instinct to factor her into them. One Saturday, I went through the last of her things. A box in the hall closet. Inside were scarves, a few books she'd never returned to the shelf, and a framed photo of us from years ago. I sat with it for a moment, studying the easy smiles, the closeness. It felt like looking at 2 strangers who happened to resemble us. I put the photo face down in the box and carried it to the garage. It would be donated, along with everything else she'd left behind. By the end of the month, the court mailed the final decree. A thin envelope, just a few sheets of paper, but the legal weight of it was absolute. I read it once, set it on the counter, and made coffee. That evening, I called Aaron, the friend who'd sent me the video. "It's done," I told him. "You good?" he asked. "I'm getting there," I said, and I meant it. That weekend, I met an old friend for dinner. Someone I hadn't seen in over a year because, back then, Claire had always found a reason for us to skip plans. The conversation flowed easily, no undercurrent of tension or performance. I realized halfway through the meal that I wasn't thinking about her at all. Back at home later, I stood on the porch and listened to the quiet of the neighborhood. The distant bark of a dog, the faint hum of a car passing, the rustle of leaves. No shadows in the windows. No rehearsed smiles waiting on the other side of the door. It struck me then that endings aren't always marked by big moments or dramatic goodbyes. Sometimes they're just the slow accumulation of small, steady steps away from something that no longer serves you. And as I stood there in the cool night air, I realized I was already further along that path than I'd thought. The weeks after the decree arrived slipped by faster than I expected. At first, I thought I'd mark the time in some deliberate way. A mental calendar of this is week 1 without her, and this is the first weekend I didn't think about calling. But life doesn't move like that. It folds forward whether you're paying attention or not. Small habits began to return. I started running again in the mornings, something I'd given up years ago when Claire complained about the noise of my shoes on the stairs before sunrise. I'd forgotten how good the air felt at that hour. Cool, crisp, smelling faintly of dew and cut grass. I cooked meals I actually wanted to eat, not just the ones we compromised on. I pulled my guitar out of the closet and left it in the living room, playing in short bursts when the mood struck me. I even called friends I hadn't spoken to in years, reconnecting in a way that made me realize how much of my social life had been trimmed down to fit the narrow shape of our marriage. Work became easier too. Without the low-grade tension of wondering what mood I'd walk into at home, I could focus. I stayed late because I wanted to, not because I was avoiding a conversation. My coworkers noticed. One of them, Leah, told me over coffee, "You seem lighter." She was right. The absence of constant suspicion and second-guessing left space for something I hadn't felt in a long time, calm. But every now and then she'd intrude. It started small. A piece of mail addressed to her, a sweater I'd missed when boxing up her things. Then a text, 3 weeks after the finalization. "I know you don't want to hear from me, but I just need to tell you I'm sorry again. I've been in therapy. I'm trying to understand myself." I didn't reply. Not because I wished her harm, but because I wasn't her audience anymore. For a while, that was the end of it. Then, one Sunday afternoon, I ran into her by accident. I'd gone downtown to pick up a few things. Books from the shop on Main, a bag of coffee from the roaster near the park. It was one of those bright, early spring days when the air feels warmer than it looks. People were out everywhere, sitting on patios, walking dogs, carrying shopping bags. I saw her before she saw me. She was standing outside a cafe, talking to someone I didn't recognize. Her hair was shorter now, styled in a way she never would have chosen before, and she was wearing a blue coat I'd never seen. For a moment I considered walking right past. Pretend I hadn't noticed, let her be just another face in the crowd. But she glanced up at the exact moment I stepped off the curb, and our eyes locked. "You look good," she said, her eyes scanning me in that quick, assessing way I remembered. "Thanks," I said. "You too." There was an awkward beat, the kind that hangs between people who used to share everything and now share nothing. "I've been meaning to reach out," she said. "I didn't want our last conversation to be." "It's fine," I interrupted gently. "We said what needed to be said." She nodded, but I could see in her eyes that she didn't agree. "I just wanted you to know. I'm not with him anymore. That ended a while ago." I didn't ask who ended it or why. I didn't want to give her the opening to tell the story in a way that invited sympathy. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said simply. Her face fell just slightly. "And you?" she asked. "Have you?" "Not yet," I said. "But I'm closer than I was." For a moment, she looked like she might say something more. Something about regret or about the version of herself she thought I'd remember. But she didn't. She just gave a small nod and said, "Take care of yourself. Okay? You too." We passed each other on the sidewalk, and I didn't look back. That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of water, listening to the quiet hum of the neighborhood. It struck me that running into her hadn't stirred up the anger I once thought it would. There was no temptation to rehash the past, no pull to reopen the door. What I felt instead was distance, a recognition that whatever had once connected us was gone, and that was okay. The house, once filled with tension, began to feel like mine in a way it never had before. I repainted the bedroom, replaced the curtains in the living room, got rid of the couch we'd picked out together and bought one that actually fit the space. One evening, while rearranging the bookshelves, I found a photo tucked into the back of a drawer. A candid *T of me laughing at something she'd said, taken years ago. I looked at it for a while, searching for signs I'd missed. But there were none. Whatever went wrong came later, slowly, the way rust spreads under paint. I put the photo back in the drawer, not because I wanted to keep it, but because I didn't feel the need to throw it away. It was a reminder that parts of our life together had been real, even if they didn't last. By the time the first warm days of summer rolled in, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't counting the weeks anymore. I wasn't measuring my days against what used to be. I was simply living them. And in that quiet, steady way, I was moving on.